This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to Koha Calisthenics, a case study in adaptability. My name is Jennifer Weston, and I'm an implementation project manager.
And I'm Felicia Beaudry. I'm a product and implementation trainer, and we're with Equinox Open Library Initiative. We're here to discuss a success story with you from our Equinox Open Source Grant. This was very much a team effort, so we want to take an opportunity to mention two people who were critical to the project but who aren't with us today. Hilda Teresa Ayala Gonzalez is the interim director of the Biblioteca Nacional de Puerto Rico, and she was our primary library contact during the project. You'll be hearing much more about her contributions as we go along. Jason Etheridge was the data analyst on this project, but he's so much more. Jason is one of our senior developers and one of the founders of Equinox. He was part of the original development team for Evergreen ILS, another open source software. We couldn't have done this project without him. You have an opportunity to get acquainted with Jason yourself. He and another colleague of ours, Rogan Hamby, are presenting Tuesday morning on KMIG, a migration tool that they've created for Koha. So before we get into details, we want to provide you with a bit of background. Equinox Open Library Initiative was established in 2007 as Equinox Software. We transitioned to a nonprofit company in 2016. We work with Koha, Evergreen, and Fulfillment. We're here today because of the Equinox Open Source Grant. The grant was first announced in June 2019. It was intended to provide libraries and archives with an opportunity to move to an open source ILS, but could not because they lacked the financial ability or expertise to do so on their own. The grant was open to libraries and archives in the United States that could demonstrate the inability to obtain or maintain an ILS without assistance, and preference was given to organizations that serve historically underrepresented, underserved, or marginalized populations. Recipients are provided with an instance of Koha with migration and implementation services and training. They also receive 3 years of hosting and support services, which can be renewed indefinitely as long as they continue to qualify. I'll turn it over now to Jennifer to tell you about our first recipients.
Biblioteca Nacional de Puerto Rico, or BNPR as we'll call it for the rest of this presentation, was one of our first two recipients for the Equinox Open Source Grant, along with Spark Central, which is a nonprofit organization in Spokane, Washington. Really wish we had time to talk to you about both of them, but for today we're just going to talk about BNPR. We'll save Spark Central for another time, maybe even another presentation. So first, a little history about BNPR. The General Library of Puerto Rico was established in 1967 as a new division within the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, or the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture. It became the National Library of Puerto Rico in 2003. Their mission is listed here, and ultimately, BNPR plays a critical role in safeguarding the published treasures of Puerto Rico and making them available for the wider public. BNPR adopted this simple and powerful statement as their motto: know your library and find your culture. We wanted to highlight this statement that you'll find on their website, and you'll also see it on their new Koha public catalog because it briefly sums up their beliefs about what they can accomplish with their services. And to honor the inspirational mission of BNPR, we recognized that we would need to clearly define the mission of the migration project we were undertaking together. What you see here is our project's mission statement. We approached the implementation of Koha with BNPR with the understanding this project would need really three fundamental things. First, we were to provide one combined database, pulling together data from multiple sources. We were to enable user access to explore the library's resources online, and we needed to create a bilingual interface.
So I'm guessing that most of you joining us today have been through at least one ILS migration, so you know typically they come with a few challenges. There can be data issues, expectations for functionality that the system isn't designed to meet, or just a general fear of the unknown. This project had its share of ups and downs, of course, like all of them do, with some more challenging than others. Very little, if any, of BNPR's collection was barcoded, but they wanted to take this opportunity to change the way they provide services. So they wanted to be able to check out materials and allow researchers to place holds. Initially, they wanted to begin barcoding everything they could, but we knew they wouldn't be able to complete that barcoding project before go live, and barcoding anything at all became impossible once COVID-19 hit. Koha also needed to be fully translated into Spanish and English. The transition or translations provided by the Koha community got us more than halfway there, but the library specific translations were a slight concern as no one at Equinox is fluent in Spanish, as you might have been able to tell already by our pronunciations. We would have to rely heavily on the library for assistance in that area. The library also wanted to provide online registration to its researchers, but that wasn't really much of a challenge given Koha's self-registration feature. The data, however, posed more of a challenge. It was divided into 19 different libraries within the legacy system over multiple databases. Jennifer will be talking about that more in detail a little bit later. Much of that data wasn't accessible outside of the physical library building either, so access became a real issue because of COVID-19. BNPR only had one contract employee to devote to the project, and that was Hilda, that we mentioned earlier. She turned out to be such a terrific partner and critical to the success of the project. She had some assistance from the Chief Information Officer for the Institute, but his availability was limited and would soon be more so. Of course, as we've mentioned a couple of times, the pandemic made everything that we needed to do more challenging. We were prepared to do the project remotely from the very beginning. However, when COVID caused shutdowns in Puerto Rico and on the mainland, things changed. I mentioned before that some of the data in the legacy system wasn't accessible outside of BNPR's building, which went into lockdown. So COVID required us all to plan for what services would or could look like if the shutdown persisted after go live, which it did, of course, and it still does in Puerto Rico, as well as what they may look like when things get back to some semblance of normal. Figuring out how to make the library's collection more accessible was critical. Prior to moving to Koha, BNPR had never been able to provide access to any of its materials outside the library, even to its staff.
And so the realities of this project, along with the challenges Felicia just described, led us all down some really unexpected paths. While creating a plan to implement a new ILS for BNPR, Puerto Rico was affected by the coronavirus just like the rest of the world. It also faced a series of additional environmental threats. We kicked off the project in February. The Institute shut down in March due to COVID-19. The hurricane season on the island began in May, and we went live in June while government offices were still closed to the public, and in most cases they still are. The week after go live brought a Saharan dust storm to Puerto Rico. And through all of this, from kickoff in February until today, 7 months later, the question always in the forefront for the implementation team has been, how can Koha help? Or, more specifically, how can we best utilize Koha's wide range of adaptability to build the kind of system that these trying times really called for? So adaptability became our common refrain. Adaptability can best be defined in this fun and simple way. Identify the path you prefer, then take a different one. Of course, that seems to imply that we had a choice, but we embraced the challenge anyway. We all recognize that adaptability is a necessary quality in a changing work environment, but we were about to demonstrate how true that really is.
So once you have identified your challenges, you need to also focus on your assets. And we found that we had many. Koha is extremely flexible and feature rich, so we knew we would be able to accomplish a lot of what BNPR wanted to do without any additional development or plugins. And I'm sure that isn't a surprise to most of you. I'm sure most of you here are big fans of Koha already. Our partners at BNPR, thankfully, were eager to upgrade their systems and weren't daunted by needing to restructure their services or their workflows. They were happy to do it. And additionally, they had the vision to look beyond the migration specifically to other projects that would enhance Koha's value to their community, including doing a website redesign and a digitization project. They also made Koha part of their anniversary celebration. So they obviously were very proud of what they were able to accomplish. Having the Institute's Chief Information Officer on the team and engaged, that probably is the key word, meant that we could address any technology needs directly with the person who was in the best position to do something about them. And we definitely needed him throughout this project. We were able to use a phased implementation design because we weren't replacing a system that the public already used. We could add functionality in stages, and we had additional time to consider how best to serve the community. And just to brag on ourselves just a little bit, the implementation team, we all have lots of experience. So we approached this project confidently that we would be able to address any obstacles successfully. So before we move on, we do want to talk about some solutions and successes we had. And for that, I will turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Felicia. The first solution and success that I want to talk about is the OPAC customization. Remember, one of the key facets of this project was going to be to provide a bilingual OPAC for users. Recognizing that a bilingual interface was key to this mission, we worked to more fully understand how both languages should be incorporated into the public catalog. We learned that Spanish is the primary language in Puerto Rico, and English is the primary language of many second and third generation Puerto Ricans living outside of the archipelago. BNPR was also looking for ways to expand access to the resources to other English-speaking populations, so we had to highlight both languages equally. So, after installing the languages for the core Koha system, the migration team worked closely with ILDA, who provided the translations for all of the library-specific custom content, sometimes on the fly during conference calls, which is the beauty of shared documents. Some design was bilingual to display both English and Spanish together at the same time on the screen, while other parts of the design were created to toggle between languages, which I think you've probably seen before in the Koha design. But we accomplished this almost exclusively by using CSS and jQuery to customize the display. And after translations were completed, which happened over many weeks and into many months, we celebrated, and then we decided that there was one more thing we can do. And so we were thrilled when we learned that the 65th anniversary of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture was coinciding with our go live. So we were able to add custom text to the OPAC to help celebrate this anniversary. In addition to translating the OPAC, the project team began conversations out about how best to introduce the new Koha system to BNPR's community of users, both English and Spanish. We explored Koha functionality that was accessible remotely, and Felicia's already talked a little about that, and we'll talk a little more about what some of those solutions were, but we knew that we needed to help users learn how to interact with the system, because it was going to be important for them to be able to do that even if they couldn't get to the National Library or even get to Puerto Rico. So as we began testing in Koha and introducing new features, ILDA began creating educational materials in Spanish that we then posted to the OPAC. ILDA has now been trained on adding links to the OPAC for any new documents that are created as we're planning for the future. At Go Live, instructional materials were available for creating an account, for searching the catalog, and for using lists and carts. So all of this educational material is still there and available directly from the OPAC without contacting the library. I mentioned list and carts. Using Koha's list and carts is making it possible for staff and patrons to organize and share their research, as well as place holds on their selected materials. A large portion of BNPR's collection is in print and is not digitized yet. So for many researchers, they must visit the library to gain access to the collection. Though we were building this remote accessibility, so now holds will allow visitors to let the library know what materials they want to consult when they are able to get back into the library and plan their visits. The ability to place holds on materials is brand new for researchers who visit BNPR, and BNPR was thrilled to make this available to their community and to what is really becoming an international community. This will facilitate scheduling visits and creating workstations for researchers while also maintaining social distancing. Initially, this decision was driven by COVID-19 and the desire to protect staff and users. However, everyone recognizes the benefit of allowing researchers to select their resources in advance, so BNPR plans to make this a permanent service.
So article requests also became a very interesting feature in the OPAC. Hilda particularly was very excited about Koha's article request feature. It allows them to provide some services while remaining closed for COVID-19 and eventually will be used for both in-house and remote users. So it expands access to the collection in a new way to users they've never been able to reach before. As part of this, we developed a special cataloging framework to provide a link and access to the Institute's journal collection. Cataloging of this collection began years ago, but ended with the 2005 issue. The move to Koha has inspired BNPR to begin a separate digitization project for this collection. So now all issues are available digitally, and the table of contents for each one is available in the Koha catalog. The new framework facilitates the addition of that table of contents for each new issue and a link to the new digital version. Combined with the article request feature, BNPR staff will be able to provide print copies to users who visit the facility or PDF copies for remote users.
And if I may digress for a moment with a quick anecdote, the state of the ICP journal data was uncovered during one of our infamous Q&A sessions about the data that usually began like this: what do you think this is? And then it ended with a plan to do something with this data. We needed to preserve it. We decided how to handle it now and how to handle it in the future. So when we discovered that we had bib records for a significant portion of the ICP journal collection, but not all of it, we were keen to help create records to complete the collection. So
Yeah,
there's a quick story about.
Yeah, it was a really awesome project and a whole new set of services that they did not have before Koha came along. So one that I'm particularly proud to see that they did and did so quickly.
Yes, very quickly. And
So
on that, yeah, I was going to
yeah,
say, and on that slide, there's a link to that. So we highly suggest people check out the digitized collection because it is really a remarkable resource.
absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about some of the other features we were able to use. Checkout by keyword is one. It's often used as a backup for when barcodes fail during circulation. So you scan your barcode and it is not found, and so you have an option of using checkout by keyword if you have that feature turned on. BNPR will be using it as the primary method for checkout because they don't have much of the collection barcoded at this time. It allows them to provide their in-person services as soon as they're able to without completing that barcoding project that they wanted to. This also allows them to do in-house circulation of materials too delicate for barcodes, which does make up at least a good chunk of their collection too. The ability to perform check-in from the patron record is making this particular method of circulation less cumbersome. We talked a lot about some of the options that we could use, but these two together really are going to make it much easier for them to start circulating when they were never able to before. While common among many libraries, the ability for patrons to register for an account online is new to BNPR. They had been focused only on in-person visitors, so self-registration now makes it possible for researchers from all over the world to request access to the digital collections that they are expanding and expanding their reach like never before. They've already seen success with this new feature, having 30 new registrations in just a few weeks after go live with absolutely no marketing or promotion whatsoever. It was simply because people were interested, saw it on the OPAC, saw it on their website, and signed up before having anyone even talk about the fact that it exists. Training, which is near and dear to my heart as the trainer on the project, was another issue we needed to address. There were members of the BNPR staff who don't speak English, and I don't speak Spanish, so it became a concern at the beginning of how we were going to make it happen. We knew we were going to have to do a train the trainer model because of that. Hilda, who again, superwoman that she is, attended all of the training, every word of it. She internalized it all, and now she is currently presenting that training to the staff. As I say, she's really a superwoman. So she not only is teaching the staff, she's also creating documents for them to have for reference afterwards.
Yeah, I agree, Felicia. Ilda really is a superwoman, and we can not say that often enough. And I have just one last note about training. There were several features we configured within Koha that we had to disable just before go live because staff could not yet be trained on how to use them. And again, Ilda stepped in to make plans for how to train them in the future when the time came. So it really does take a village. So that leaves me to talk about the data transformation, which is the last example of our solutions and successes we're going to share with you today. It starts with data transformation, and data disentanglement, as I like to call it, is a common aspect, of course, of any ILS implementation if you're migrating data, and each one's a little different. As we mentioned before, BNPR data was housed in different physical locations, separated into 19 different libraries within the data, and we needed to combine them. When we started digging in, we found the data clearly showed the effects of multiple data migrations over the years that reflected a series of changes in cataloging practices. And remember, this is a national library whose very mission is to preserve cultural resources, so weeding wasn't going to be part of this plan. So I like to say that digging into the history of this kind of data is like studying tree rings. Each layer or each ring or layer of data offers a new clue to what the conditions were like when the data was recorded, and we investigated many, many clues. While we were investigating the clues, BNPR made it clear to us that they did not want to leave any data behind. So we migrated everything, and we developed a rigorous plan for categorizing holdings from the various collections, even if they were not going to be made visible right away in the OPAC. Recognizing that the data review and changes in the cataloging procedures are going to continue for an undetermined amount of time at this point in the project plan, we worked with ILDA to provide a solid foundation for the path forward. And how did we do that? We helped devise plans. We helped devise a plan for barcoding the collection. We created a bilingual staff interface where Spanish and English terms could coexist and would display together. We created a series of custom bibliographic frameworks that Felicia mentioned earlier, and we documented all temporarily disabled features so that they could be enabled when the time was right.
So let's wrap things up by talking about some of what we've learned and what we'll be using in future projects and a little advice that we would like to share with all of you. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to start with the takeaways for us.
So takeaways for us. We're talking to the Koha community. So you all know that we work with lots of different libraries that come from lots of different systems on their path to Koha. And while we consider some of these more routine than others, we can always learn. And this was a thrilling adventure of learning for all of us. So here are takeaways for us. And for us, I mean the migration team. This was the Equinox team working with the BNPR team. So number one, Koha is awesome. But we already knew Koha was awesome. We all do. That's why we're here. But this project forced us to look at features we normally take for granted or had preconceived ideas about how they would be used in more traditional libraries. So in the end, we didn't need any additional plugins or development to make Koha work for BNPR. We just needed to think about how we could use it. It had everything we needed and confirmed for us the reasons we picked Koha as an ILS for our grant recipients, because Koha is adaptable. Number two, communication is key. Simple, but true. Even prior to COVID-19, this was going to be a project done entirely remotely. As much as our entire team would have loved to go to Puerto Rico, it was never going to happen. So instead, we employed a wide array of communication methods, including emails, conference calls, teleconferencing, screen sharing tools, and shared online documents so we could work together. This wasn't always easy, especially once everyone was working from home, with sometimes challenging over tax infrastructures for internet access, but we found we could collaborate successfully because our communication strategies are adaptable. Number three, we needed to see beyond our own perceived limitations, including presumed gaps in knowledge and skills, to find solutions. We recognized this was a non-traditional Koha implementation for our migration team. We would be working with a non-circulating library without a barcoded collection or a current patron database that served a large Spanish-speaking community. And as you've seen, neither Felicia nor I are fluent in Spanish. But we knew Koha was up to the challenge, and even though nobody on our migration team spoke fluent Spanish, we knew we weren't alone because we were able to rely heavily on ILDA to help with translations and to provide training for her staff, because implementation plans are adaptable. And lastly, number four, every Koha implementation is a partnership. And a successful partnership is made up of strong individuals being supported in a collaborative environment where all striving towards shared success. So it was clear from the beginning that this partnership was going to be successful because it was based on a commitment to shared success. And ultimately, the Koha implementation for BNPR was successful because strong partnerships are adaptable.
So what are some of the takeaways that we can give to you? Hopefully, many of these you probably have already heard, but it doesn't hurt to hear them again. Things are rarely going to be as easy as you would like them to be. That is sort of the nature of things. 2020 probably has taught us that better than any year prior, at least in our lifetimes. So staying positive and managing fear and expectations are absolutely critical to success. Hilda, when she began this project, was a contract employee, all alone, essentially, except for some help from the CIO for the Institute. She was assigned to implement this project on short notice without a whole lot of help otherwise within the structure of BNPR. She ended up doing so mostly from home during the pandemic and with a few other interesting 2020 obstacles thrown in. She easily could have been difficult to work with, especially after realizing how much we needed her to contribute to the project. But instead, she was eternally optimistic that things were going to work out well and had the vision to see the benefits to her community and was always ready to help. Even though we could not see her, we knew she always had a smile on her face. Success can be organizational and personal. Hilda is no longer a contract employee with BNPR. She is now the full-time interim director of BNPR. And while I know this project certainly had something to do with that, our experience working with her tells us that there were probably many other examples of why she was promoted to that position. We could not congratulate her more on the change. Um, when you're in a situation like this, you have to look for creative solutions. Don't be afraid to reconsider your long held policies or reconstruct old workflows to accomplish your goals. Both of us talked about this many times in preparation for this presentation and during the project that the last thing you want to do is just stay in your old way of doing things. You cannot progress without looking forward and reorganizing what you do. So the way we've always done it is some of our least favorite words in the English language. Uh, you have to think about what your goals really are, and can you change things to make your collection more accessible or your services more beneficial to your users? A migration is an excellent opportunity to weed, consolidate shelving locations, patron groups, reinvent your services, but you don't have to wait for migrations to do this. You can do it anytime. It's a bit more work, but always well worth doing.
So as we're nearing the end of the talk, I'd like to repeat what we've said often about the value of Koha and the Koha community. At Equinox, we have a set of guiding principles that we call the Equinox Promise. And embedded in one of those principles is the belief that the community is the true voice of any open source software. And that is certainly true with Koha. So through this presentation, we are honored to introduce BNPR to the Koha community and to introduce the Koha community to the National Library of Puerto Rico.
We haven't really seen the full potential of BNPR yet because they haven't been able to physically reopen to the public, but we've already seen new users for their services in the short time that they've been with Koha, and we think it fitting to leave you with this last hopeful statement from BNPR's new interim director, Hilda. I won't read it to you. It's eloquent enough just on the screen, but I will leave you with that. Before we go, though, we do want to announce that we are doing another round of grants in 2021. Eligibility is again only for U.S. organizations that are 501c3 or U.S. federal, state, or local government entities with a demonstrable financial need. So we'll be taking into account the impact of COVID-19 on organizations this year. That obviously wasn't part of our thought process last year, but it will be now. Preference will be given again to those organizations that serve historically underrepresented, underserved, or marginalized communities. So please spread the word to libraries and archives you feel may be eligible for this grant. Applications are being accepted from now until November the 1st, 2020, and we plan to announce the new recipients around the 1st of the year. So if you are interested in more information about BNPR, about the Equinox Open Source Grant, or Equinox in general, you can always contact us. There's the email for Jennifer and I again. If you have any questions about this particular project or any projects in general, that we're always one to talk about just about anything library related, cataloging
True.
and such.
Mhm.
If you want to know more about Equinox, you can go to our website and see that. You can also find us on social media, and there's our email too for the general organization. So any of those can be used to reach us. And we will wrap up with a big thank you for joining us today. We appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about what we do, and especially about BNPR and what they're going to accomplish as part of the Koha community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.